So today I'm going to be sharing my long-term thoughts on the Fujifilm X-Pro1. You guys may or may not have been waiting for this one. I don't know, but it's been a long time since I've talked about this camera. And before anyone says, well, I thought you didn't watch camera gear reviews anymore. I don't. I just make them still. So the point is, I'm not going to talk about anything technical or specifications or anything like that. I just want to share some of my experiences and the things I've learned for using this camera for the past 2.5 years or so. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's get started. So you guys know about this camera already. You've probably heard, seen, or whatever. And I think the X-Pro1 is still one of those really interesting and fun cameras to use. So I initially bought this camera just because I needed like an interchangeable lens type body, because at the time all I had was the X100V, and ever since getting the Fujifilm X-T4 it hasn't really seen much use in my everyday photography, but I'll pick it up every now and then. Essentially, shooting with this camera has allowed me to break a lot of personal beliefs I've had with photography in general. A lot of people talk about this camera's unique sensor, but I personally think there's a lot more to it than just its sensor. One of the things I've learned when using this camera is that anything goes in photography. When you use a camera as old as this and you're able to create good images that you can put up as prints and sell and stuff like that, you realize that a lot of stuff when it comes to photography just doesn't really matter. And I'm going to over-articulate this point again because it's just so true. But when I use cameras such as the X-Pro1, anything really goes because you can choose what camera you use. The technical specifications of a lot of things don't matter, and you don't need the newest and latest and greatest type gear to take good images. And so then it becomes more about finding the tool that is best for you and less about the best tool. And I think a large part of my realization of that came from using the X-Pro1 over the years, because I would go out and take photos, sometimes just for fun, and end up with really, really good images that I could use and sell as prints. And I think that has kind of been opening my eyes a lot. I guess this kind of goes for a lot of other cameras you can use as well, but in particular, in my kit, it happens to be the X-Pro1. And so the X-Pro1 is not clinically perfect. It doesn't have the most insane amount of dynamic range or megapixels to its sensor or anything like that. But for me, it's overall just a lot of fun to use, and I can get a lot of really interesting creative looks out of it. And that's more of a reason enough for me to keep it, use it, hold on to it, whatever. Second point I want to make is that the X-Pro1 has kind of become my have fun camera, or my no expectations camera. My main drivers are the X100V and the X-T4, just because they're really, really capable cameras and I really like using them as well. But I'll often pick up the X-Pro1 when I want to go outside and I feel like bringing a camera along with me as well. And I'm not worried about getting clinical perfection or even worried about getting the best image quality for everything. I'll just pick up the X-Pro1 because I feel like using it that day. And it allows me to shoot and go live my life without the expectations of getting the best image possible whenever I use like something like the X-T4, which is much better than the X-Pro1, let's be honest, but it's better for a different reason. So whenever I go out and pick up the X-Pro1 nowadays, it's more of when I feel like shooting, but I don't feel like carrying the weight of my photography on my shoulders. Now, I'm not saying that you can't do this with any other cameras. You can for sure, and there's nothing necessarily special about the X-Pro1 that makes it capable for doing that, but I do think it's important for many photographers to have kind of a have fun camera in their kit when they don't want to go out and take photos for all of those reasons. Another point I want to bring up that's kind of been interesting that I've been thinking about lately is that cameras for me have started to become more like brushes and not necessarily like tools. Like, yeah, I still call them tools and whatever, but there's like this small narrative that goes around that suggests that we should invest more in our lenses than our bodies because we're just going to be replacing our bodies years down the road and whatever, and bodies are more replaceable than lenses. And although I find that very true as well, I don't really think it applies to certain cameras like the X-Pro1 or the X100V, especially for me. I've begun to start thinking about my camera bodies and lens combinations, whatever, as more like brushes to create what I want to visually. And I can understand this if you're trying to keep up with the latest and greatest, if it's in your kind of profession or pay grade to do so. But for me, shooting with this camera, because it's so old and it's still pretty good, I've begun to realize that the modernization of technology and cameras is that you can use however old of a camera you want and it doesn't really matter. And if so that's the case, then replacing bodies isn't as necessary as it once was thought of. Maybe it wasn't really necessary in the first place, you know what I mean? And then it's more, again, about finding the right tool, not the best tool. And so even if this camera is slower than most in terms of autofocus, even if the image quality in terms of megapixels and whatever isn't as good as other cameras, if it's the camera you work the best with, whatever camera that might be, then it's in your best interest to continue using and keeping that camera, because it's just what you're going to create your best work with. And it's more about the work we create, obviously, than the tools we use. But the right tool for us is the right tool for our creativity or vision or whatever it happens to be like that. You know what I mean? So long-winded answer to say, essentially, that the X-Pro1 is kind of one of those cameras for me, is that I don't expect it to be or keep up with any of the modern cameras or anything like that. I just use it because I like using it. And I think if you have a camera like that that's special towards you, that you just enjoy using for the sake of using, it's important to just keep it and hang on to it and not worry about upgrading it or replacing it or selling it, because a lot of times when it comes to that, like, I know if I sell my X100V or one of these cameras, I'm gonna regret it, you know. And certain cameras like those, it's okay to keep, and you don't need to replace your bodies all the time. Yeah, don't know much else to say to that. So anyways, again, this was kind of just long-term thoughts I've had in the past 2.5 years of using this camera and understanding different things about photography and camera gear and equipment that I've realized kind of were just not right in my use case scenario. Hopefully you guys found this interesting. If you guys would like to share any thoughts you have from using either this camera or just like, I don't know, older cameras in general, feel free to leave them down in the comments below if you would like to see more things in regards to photography and other stuff like that, productivity, creativity, art, whatever. Subscribe to this channel below, and I will see you guys in another video. As always, thanks for watching. Peace.